think that like the important thing is to kind of just like, try to remind yourself. And again, this is what I mean by it's like it's an exercise of like repetition and stuff. It's just to
Mhm.
constantly remind yourself that it's like as long as you enjoy the process of whatever it is you're doing,
Mm.
it's like it'll never feel like a day of work in your life kind of thing. The second we focus on numbers and things like this, that's when everything kind of goes off the rails. And it's like it just no longer feels like it's enjoyable because that huge number that we're always trying to get
Get to,
is
yeah.
absolutely unattainable.
You're just funny. It's funny, the way you tell the story and everything.
Funny how?
Come here, though. Yeah, he's crazy, see? Who are you?
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Are you ready?
All right, ladies and gents, exciting episode today. Exciting episode. I am going to just cut right to the chase because I love this dude. I've known him 2 decades at this point. He is the founder of Retro Recipes, great channel where he'll do throwback recipes. And not only does he have a great YouTube channel, but he just overall creates great content. Everyone, please help me welcome Bobby Hicks.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Hey, girl. Hey. I can hear you good, buddy.
All right.
Nice camera.
Yeah, right. Are you using like a mirrorless camera now, or?
Cheers.
I was gonna say the resolution on yours is significantly better.
That's what I do for a living, right?
Yeah.
Like if I was to hop into your kitchen,
that
shit's gonna be that shit's gonna be decked out for sure. Yeah, dude, our attention span is
3 seconds.
Is it 3 now?
Mm-hmm.
You think it'll ever go negative?
I don't know. When we were like teenagers, I remember because I like somebody brought this up. They were like, because obviously I feel like I have a little bit of ADHD or just like anything grabs my attention. It takes a lot for me to stay focused. And I remember somebody at the time was like, "You realize that the attention span right now is about 10 or 13 seconds." So you have to kind of like make sure that you stay focused and read your books or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's like at some point about a year or so ago, I was really curious about it and I typed it in and sure enough, it pops up and it says that after a recent study, the estimated human attention span is roughly 3 seconds or less.
Jesus. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me with everything going on with vertical and, I get it. But I think there's also something, I was talking to this filmmaker a few episodes back. Her name's Cortland. Shout out Cortland. But I was talking to her on the show, and we were having this interesting conversation that I didn't even think about. But she made a good point where I think a lot of it has to do with like the vertical swiping aspect as well, right? Because there's something sexy about like going up versus like doing that. You know what I mean? Like it's just easier to go swiping up versus like you watch a YouTube channel, it's always horizontal on your phone if you were to watch it. And you don't swipe, you're just in it. But when it's a YouTube Shorts, you're just kind of like, you have this mode now where we're trained ever since maybe, I don't know, IGTV. I don't know when it first started, but we're just trained on that vertical content now, and now we can't get out of it,
Yeah, it's like I kind of feel like the initial patterns were starting to kind of develop around that time where it's like on social media, it was very common, especially if you're going mobile, to like your phone and just kind of just thumb it up vertically and stuff like this. Or it's like one of the dating apps and stuff, and everybody was like, swipe left, swipe right. And it's like people just kind of got in the habit of just like, it's like around that period of time, let's say maybe like 5 years ago or more, it's like that's when people were just blasting through stuff. And it's like, it's funny because nowadays, like sometimes I'll be on my phone and I'll actually kind of get caught into like that motion. Like I'll be like, oh man, I'm just blindly sliding through stuff right now.
Oh yeah.
And it's funny because when I'm doing it, there might be a moment when like there's something that I actually wanted to see.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get out of it, you can't get back to that same video. And so now there's kind of like this element of where I'm trying to at least be like a little more mindful about what I'm doing, because let's say there is something I wanted to see. If you just blast through it or just kind of X out of something carelessly, you might not have the opportunity to actually see it.
Yeah, it's a good point, especially on TikTok, right? Because I think if you try to go back up, it refreshes
Mhm.
if I remember. So like every time, like I remember I was showing Brenda, and I was showing her something. I was like, "Oh, you got to check a look at this," and I swiped down to go back to it, and it refreshed the whole thing. And I was like, hold on, and I went like 50 videos, and I still couldn't find it. I'm like, it's gone. I'm never gonna see that again. And
It's actually funny because
they do that on purpose. No, I would imagine keep you on the app longer.
yeah, maybe. It's funny because like what I actually do is if I see anything now, like I have a couple of just like go to um kind of accounts that like I just like share memes with, like my brother or like a couple of my friends and stuff. And it's like, depending what it is. If it's cat content, I'm sending it to my buddy Brian. If it's just like something stupid, I'll send it to my brother or something. And I see like 90% of the time it's because I really want to share this with somebody. But then there's a solid 10% of the time where like my brother will sit there and be like, why did you send this to me? And I was just like, oh, well, I had to send it because I wanted to go back and look at it later. And I knew I wouldn't be able to find it again,
That's right.
And he's like,
Yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
that is a good point. It's kind of like you're creating a playlist amongst friends.
It's almost like dog earing like the actual thing so that you can refer back to it later. Because otherwise,
Love
like with the amount of content that's just like constantly being produced or just like being like recycled, you never see it, which is also kind of funny if you think about it, because every single day there are millions of people creating content, right?
Yeah.
Millions of people.
Mhm.
They're just creating videos, whether they're short or long, highly produced or not highly produced. And somehow I still end up seeing the exact same videos all the time. Like it does not change.
Yeah, that is weird, right? And maybe they're just doing that because, again, it's just all that algorithm. They're like, oh, we're just going to keep feeding this dude the same shit. But then,
Kinda.
because that's kind of the blowback that Instagram's getting, right? Is unlike TikTok, it's not allowing the consumer, us, to follow creators that we don't know. It's not letting you identify new creators. It's just feeding you the same bullshit that you've seen for 2 decades. Versus
much, yeah.
versus TikTok, which I've seen videos on there that I've never seen in the past, and creators that I've never seen, and eventually you start following those people. But even when you follow those people, I feel like unlike Instagram, I always, whether it's a story or a post, I always find myself, seeing the same people. Like obviously it's a lot of you, and it's a lot of like some of my close friends, and like all those people that I maybe interact with a lot. So maybe Instagram reads that and just feeds me that, versus like TikTok, I'm getting a lot of new stuff all the time, and I find myself seeing new videos and new creators that I don't see. Do you see that as well on your feed, or is it kind of like the same thing across all platforms?
Honestly, what I've actually come to find, and like I've even heard this from a lot of other creatives, is that in general, by the time that you see something on Instagram,
Mhm.
it's usually already, especially if it's like a trending video, it's something that has already lived and existed on TikTok for like a month before. So I
Mm.
mean, it makes sense that like you're probably seeing things on TikTok beforehand because, you know, it's like Instagram now is kind of looking the way that Facebook looked for us, where it's
Mhm.
like, people might use it, but the people that were using it were usually a little bit older because it was just like a different format and it was like their platform, and then now it's like Instagram is kind of more and more becoming more of like the millennial platform, whereas like the Gen Z platform is more TikTok
TikTok.
oriented.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like because they're boosting the content, just pumping it out. It's like we're seeing that stuff probably more immediately if you were to be on TikTok, but if you were to jump over to Instagram, it might show up there like weeks or a month later.
Yeah. And more people are on TikTok now than I think the first, because the inception of TikTok, or excuse me, the inception of Instagram, I forget the number. I was looking this up the other day because it was super, super interesting to me, that there's more people now on TikTok than there ever has been at the max of Instagram's life, if that makes sense. So like more people are
Yeah.
using the app on a daily basis versus like if you go back 20 years when, or maybe it was 15 years when Instagram started and they got bought up by Meta, there was not as many people the first few years on that platform as now TikTok is, only because people don't understand. TikTok's 3 years old, 4 years old, like legit. It was Musical.ly
No, I remember.
beforehand, but
Yeah.
like that's
I remember actually, like, because my buddy Caleb, who's now like one of the biggest like TikTok people, like he was a good friend. Like we were living in New York and stuff. His ex girlfriend at the time lived like down the street from my apartment, so I'd see Caleb all the time, and like we'd hang out and stuff. And at the basically 2020, like at the pandemic portion of things, like when we were during like lockdown, and we were starting to kind of get out more. It's like Caleb's the only person I actually interact with. He was like, "Man, dude, you got to like check out TikTok, blah blah blah." And I was like, I just hear people doing dancing. It's not really for. I can't see how that would relate for me, And he was at the very beginning of it. He was just like, no, no, no. It used to be Musically, now it's TikTok, totally different thing. You should jump on this. He was like, I'm already getting tens of thousands of followers and stuff, and he'd like just kind of gotten into it. And I mean, now he's the how much do you pay for rent guy?
Yeah.
It's like
Which is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, like he's doing very good.
Yeah. Yeah, he's cranking. And again, now he can actually probably, I mean, I would guess, maybe you've talked to him about this, but like during the pandemic, was he thinking about leaving New York because of where it was? And then now, if you look at how he's creative and what his videos have given him, it's like you can't really do that in Wisconsin, right? Like,
yeah, no,
it's perfect, the timing of everything, because now there's like no reason not to leave, like, because that's it, right? He figured out, what to do.
It's like I kind of feel like I feel like the pandemic did like kind of this big paradigm shift for everyone. In some way or capacity, it affected your life, either obviously in a negative or a positive way. But it's one of those things where, for me, for example, like if I hadn't left New York, I wouldn't have started the Rich Recipe series because it didn't have space. I didn't have space in the New York kitchen. And that's why I did more like studio based work. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be doing what I do now. And it's the same idea. Caleb, he was from North Carolina. He moved to New York, and when he just gotten there, like we connected and stuff like this. And, it's like he was one of those people that was able to kind of just like really do some incredible things because he is also a little crazy. Like he never would have tried to leave because he was just like gunning for it. He was like, I know there's an energy here. There's a position for me here and stuff. And he rolled with it and made it into something that others hadn't seen. And I think that's really cool because, it's cool. Like that is taking the initiative and taking the power and stuff and kind of that Gretzky approach of like skating where the puck is going. And it's like, and I like to kind of clarify as well. It's not like Caleb just started doing that. It's like he tried so many different things until he found what worked. Mm-hmm. And he got the virality and he got the exposure and he just kind of kept doing it. And now it's like, I think he's been doing that series for about a year, but it's like before that, he was just doing all sorts of weird stuff. Like I helped him shoot like a thing once with my drone where he and some friends got like go-karts and they dressed up as like Mario and Luigi and Toad and like all the Mario things. And they rode around New York City in these things, like in Brooklyn and in the city and stuff. And they had kind of like their own little Mario Kart video that they made, and it's like,
so cool.
That was fun. It did really well, but it wasn't the thing that made him who he is. And so he just kept trying things out until he actually found his own thing, I don't know. It's kind of fun to see that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there's so many great examples that are, I mean, you're a great example as well, where you throw up a bunch of things on the wall, see what sticks. And
kind of it.
Yeah, right. But I mean, it's all things, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as I've known you, you've done things that you love, no matter, what the pay is or what the space you have. Like you're doing things because you're so creative. You have that creative mindset. But now it seems like with Retro Recipes, it's almost like just looking at you and looking at you now, looking on when you're creating TikTok, talking to you on the phone. Like, I feel like you've been doing it forever in your mind. And like subconsciously, right? Like this is something that you've always wanted to do, but you could never do. And then now you're like in your happy place. And it's almost like, I can't see you doing anything else now. Is that accurate? Like, is this your passion?
Well, yeah, it's definitely my passion. Like I love cooking. It's like cooking has always been like something even when I was like a little kid. You know, cooking was one of those things that like I just had a kind of like interest in and a connection to. But it is kind of funny because it's one of those things where like doing these videos, you know, it's like especially when you have like a system and you're like you're kind of going out of your way to like repeat that system. It's think of like with podcasting, you know, it's like you do it and you're kind of like you're figuring out the roles and you're figuring out like the relationship of everything, and you'll kind of go back a little later and redo it and you're kind of keep tweaking, and then after it feels like a pretty short period of time you've actually have like a pretty refined idea of exactly what you want to do. And so even though it feels in a weird way kind of like I've been doing this for like 10 years or something like this. I've only really been doing it for about a year and a half or coming on 2 years. But it's like, because I've done, I mean, last year alone, I shot 40 retro recipe videos. So like filmed ones with Katie's voice acting and all this other stuff. And then I shot hundreds of other cooking videos and stuff. It's like in a very short period of time, I was able to actually knock out a ton of content, which kind of, I guess, just reinforces like the format and everything else, and makes it kind of feel like as if I could have been doing it a whole lot longer when really I've just I've just
started
been
really
cranking it. Yeah, I've just been cranking it though.
Yeah, which is insane, dude. Because I mean, again, not only and for people that don't know, I'm going to leave all the links and everything in the description. But are you just doing vertical? Because you also have a YouTube as well. Are you doing your YouTube on your personal, or is it Retro Recipes also YouTube? Because I know you've done some longer videos and cut those up, but what's the situation there?
So with YouTube, you know, I've also been kind of just basically taking the same videos and adding them on there and stuff. But I've been trying things out. You know, it's like, for example, most of the videos I do are between 90 seconds to like, you know, 3 to 5 minutes, depending on what it is that I'm shooting, like the style of the video. And, you know, it's one of those things where because vertical format is something that does exist on YouTube, even though like I think still landscape is kind of more preferred, you know, I'll still upload a vertical video on there. But then like I'll take a little time to actually create like a customized thumbnail for it and stuff so that it stands out a bit more.
Sure.
But it's like I think more on YouTube I've just been testing out like the shorts feature and just kind of taking these longer videos and then cutting them down into like a really tiny bite size, you know, 58 seconds or so to kind of just get it on there, you know.
Yeah, sure.
I am planning on doing some landscape videos and stuff this year, but honestly it's just one of those things where like it takes so much time, and recently like I've just been trying to kind of like figure out exactly what I want to do. And I don't know, it's like I think in a way like just trying to kind of avoid burnout, because you know it's like I went from doing daily, you know, on TikTok or on Instagram. I did that for about a year, and now it's like I'm trying to dial it down to about like 3 maybe 4 you know videos a week. But it's like that still is a ton. And then I'm also doing content for like a couple of other brands and stuff that are on the side, and then just like the regular stuff that I actually negotiate. So it's like as much as I really want to, as much as I really want to do like landscape YouTube videos and stuff that are a little more like highly produced and shot my camera and edited and stuff, it's like it's not at the top of my priority right now because it's already such an oversaturated, you know, market anyway on YouTube.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you know, again, it's like you spent so long creating these videos. Like I found that as well, whether it's just a podcast or maybe it's like a sometimes I'll have this thing where I'll do these microcasts now, which I'm really enjoying, where it's like just these 5 to 10 minute, because I like to rant, as you know, but it's rant research is what I like to call it, because I'll find like an article that's super interesting, whether it's like with, you know, mental health or sleep, or maybe it's contrast therapy, something like that. And I'll just kind of open it up and I'll put it in bullet point form in the podcast. And I'll just kind of rant individually about it and make them 10 minutes. And I'll put those on YouTube, no editing. I just put it up, no intro, no music. I'm just like, hey guys, this is and those get more views than my hour and a half, 2-hour podcast that I spend like fucking hours like cutting out the ums and you know what I mean? Like, and I'm sure you could probably relate to where when you were making like these legit films, it takes so long and it's so beautiful. But now I feel like, I don't want to say people consume content and don't appreciate it, because I don't think that's accurate. But I think there's a level in between to where, like we talked about earlier, their attention span's 3 seconds. So if you're making an hour-long gorgeous film like you used to do, right, in New York, and you're doing these vlogs and they're beautiful. I remember those. They're like 60 frames per second, and it's foggy, and it's like Brooklyn Bridge, and I'm just like, ugh, and I'm just like amazed at it. But now even me, and I'm a creative, and I'm just like, I don't know if I could sit through that. Not because it's not beautiful, it's because there's not enough time in the day to consume all the content that's out there. And I feel like the more content that gets pushed to us, it's going to be harder for creatives to do those, unless you're a Peter McKinnon. It's going to be long, it's going to be hard to do those long form podcasts or long form videos rather, and actually keep people engaged. Right? Like,
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like, I think that the trouble that we kind of run into, right? And we're talking about it right now, is just the fact that it's like, when you are making these videos for an audience, right? It's like you are doing this in the hopes that you're going to entertain and make everybody happy, right? Like,
right.
which is not possible. It's like
Crazy
there's
to
the
think.
expression like, you could have the juiciest, ripest peach, from a tree, and there's always somebody that doesn't like peaches.
Right.
It's kind of like the struggle that we run into, where it's like it's a generational thing at this point. We've got
Right.
an entire like cohort of folks that are really into longer format stuff. I feel like you and I are kind of similar to this, where if I have to drive down to Miami or something like this and it takes me an hour, I'm excited, because that's 2 hours round trip that I can sit there listening to podcasts and people talk, and I love that stuff. Whereas, there's also a different cohort of like newer generational people that are like, I can't stand to listen to something that's longer than 90 seconds, because there's so much that they want to take in. There's nothing wrong or right about it, right? It is one of those things where it's impossible to kind of, I've come to realize for years now, it's impossible to placate everybody. And so I think the most important thing is kind of just sticking with what you're enjoying and what you're good at, because, if you really look at it, it's like, there are compromises, kind of like what you've been saying and what I was saying, where it's just like you take this longer form content, and then you can shave it and make these other like little smaller ones that people might actually enjoy, and they might find it might be more discoverable, and they might get more views because they're so digestible, right? Because honestly, like if, let's say I'm watching a knife sharpening video, right? Because those are very much things. If I see that, like I might not feel inclined to click on a video that has, 65 minutes of this guy like sharpening these beautiful knives and stuff, and actually learn this technique, and just hearing like the real process in the raw format, where it's just like, it's just going at it. Whereas like if I saw somebody doing it in a, like 5-minute video, I'd be like, okay, I can afford 5 minutes.
That's right.
So you just
true,
have to understand, your audience, because the guy that in particular that I'm mentioning, he has an incredibly popular channel. It's called Perfection. I forget his burr, like a knife, like the burr, the edge of the, and it's like Burrfection, and it's like he'll make these videos that are like crazy long, but he has a huge audience that loves watching it. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's like, kind of depends what your goal is. If you're looking to create this content and you actually have an audience that will watch this, guess how much more reward you're going to get for people watching this longer format stuff and making it through that. You don't need as many shorter form people to do it if you have more longer form audience members that can enjoy it. So I don't know. I mean, it's a give and a take. It's.
I mean, it's like dance competitions. Like, I'm going somewhere with this, folks. But like these dance competitions, Brenda, my wife, she loves them. The not just those, but the American Idol, and So You Think You Can Dance, and all that stuff. But turns out millions of people around the world watch these and like are so into like semifinals, finals, and they know all the stars and the techniques. And I'm like, what? Why do you watch this? She's like, I don't know, I just love it. And then but they are one of the most popular shows ever in history. Same thing with The Bachelor, right? So all this production and this money goes into these shows, and advertisers want to be the commercial break in between these shows. So there is a market for everything. And just because you don't think there's a market doesn't mean there's not going to be a market. So like, that's one thing that I learned from you was as a creative, I need to just do things that I like, and people are going to either find me or they're not. But as long as I can be content with the fact that I'm enjoying it, I mean, that's the key, because there's 8 billion people on the planet. Like, people are going to, if you got good content and you have something to give value, people are going to listen. That's just the bottom line. You can't let, outside influences affect that decision making.
I mean, like you've chatted with a lot of people. I feel like you've had like 100 different people say the same thing, but it's one of those things that like it is an exercise in kind of just like reminding yourself there's so many people that want to be viral hit sensations, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where you realize that that's not the goal. Like being a viral hit sensation literally means nothing. Like I had a conversation with somebody recently where I explained just because like I've had videos that went viral and they had millions of views, and it did bring me more exposure, and sometimes it brings you a greater audience. But if you don't have a way to kind of continue doing this, and especially, I mean, like end of the day, it's like if you're just looking to get viral videos and you don't have like a monetizing plan as well, like a way that you can actually like use this audience that you've built up for some kind of benefit, then I feel like you're kind of selling yourself short. And so I think like when people start to only focus on like, look, I got to get the next viral video, they forget about the people that actually already subscribe to their own content. Which, yeah, I mean, like even if it's 100 people, that's a lot of people. That you're affecting 100 people. If it's 1,000 people, that's like if you actually step back and you take a minute and you're like, if you say 100 people, suddenly that value seems bigger. If you say 1,000 people, that feels huge. But I think today in this age, like because we're so used to people saying, "Oh, I just hit like." My millionth subscriber, I've hit this and this, and like well, I can't wait to get 10,000 or 20,000, like these arbitrary numbers that kind of like steps in the ladder. Because we're I think like we're so conditioned to that, we forget about how huge 100 people actually is. How many people that actually like 1,000 people. Think about that if you were to see, like imagine like a basketball stadium or something like this, and you're realizing like that many people are actually subscribing to your content.
Right. That's huge.
I don't know. It gets kind of crazy. And so I think that like the important thing is to kind of just like, try to remind yourself. And again, this is what I mean by it's like, it's an exercise of like repetition and stuff. It's just to constantly remind yourself that it's like, as long as you enjoy the process of whatever it is you're doing, it's like, it'll never feel like a day of work in your life kind of thing.
Sure.
It's important to kind of do that, because the second we focus on numbers and things like this, that's when everything kind of goes off the rails, and it's like it just no longer feels like it's enjoyable, because that huge number that we're always trying to get is absolutely unattainable.
Yeah, and it's forever changing too, right? Like we thought that 1 million people were,
and that's what I mean. That's what I mean by unattainable. Is that it's like you can hit 1 million. There are people that do it all the time. Yeah. But then when you've got celebrities that have 28 million followers and stuff, and it just gets to a point where it's a number that means nothing anymore. And it's like you hit 10,000 followers. I can tell you right now, 10,000 followers doesn't feel like anything different than 1,000 followers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I did notice that as my following kind of went up on Instagram, and I started, and I got to get more aggressive on TikTok, but it was funny because, I mean, the engagement really didn't change. Of course, the likes, the views, if you dive deep into the analytics, but in terms of like, it's not like you get more DMs. I thought like once I hit like over 10,000 that I'm going to get like, 50 brands DM me. I can't believe you're at 10. And then I started thinking, nothing's changed. Like my content's the same. I say the same thing. My audience reacts the same. There's a little bit of hate here and there, but there's more, 95% more positive than anything. And it's just, you just don't, when you get to a certain point, I think you just look at it and say, it's really not that big of a deal. Maybe from like a brand perspective, if you want to reach out to brands, but even brands aren't even looking at numbers as much as they did even just 5 years ago, because especially with everything going on with UGC and all that stuff, that's super fascinating to me as well. That I've noticed other creators that have less following than me that are actually picking up brand deals because people don't want Kim Kardashian doing a commercial anymore. Like they want the real people. So, you know, no one's reaching out to The Rock. The Rock's got a fucking 200 million followers or whatever he's got. Like no one, he's got his own shit going on. No brands are reaching out to The Rock. That's like unobtainable for them because it's way too much money. But an influencer that has 5,000, 10,000 followers, these micro influencers, these are a little bit more sexy to a brand now because it keeps their bottom line low and it's more authentic. It's more real. You know, they don't want the I know what I'm doing type of person all the time. So I think there's two spectrums, right? There's the what we know and love, which is influencer marketing, and then, you know, that authentic. So it's two that are kind of going parallel with each other. So I think it's okay. It's more obtainable on one side, which is the authentic side, but it doesn't mean that one's better than the other. It just means now you have two options. So when people are putting out content, I think they're putting the pressure on themselves like, I have to get to 100,000. I have to get to 500,000. Like, you don't have to do anything because if you got good content, you got a good look, sometimes a brand will just want to reach out to you for that alone. You know, you can't, if you get the numbers out of your head, I think that's how you can really impact your audience from a creative side. Because I feel like once you get those numbers, a lot of people that I've talked to on this show is like, once you get to the number, your content starts changing for the audience, which could be a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Where now you're not doing it for yourself. Now you're doing it because you have X amount of followers. You know?
Yeah, like in my experience, is one of those things where, yeah, I mean, I know plenty of folks that have way bigger audiences than I have, but it's also kind of a matter of like your initiative and your drive, because I think a lot of folks that like, especially, I think like the general idea that people have is that it's like you create content and you build an audience, and then at a certain point you build enough of an audience that all of a sudden like there's an imaginary gate that opens and brands want to come to you, they want to bring you money. And in the history of social media, unless like you have millions of subscribers or you get just like the craziest engagement, that's generally not the case.
That's right.
You know, it's like people you will attract attention. Brands will recognize, you know, talent. They'll recognize like an audience, you know, that like you've organically developed and built. But it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that like a brand is going to come to you and be like, now let's partner. It's like that might spark a conversation, but in general, you know, it's like I know people that have much larger followings than I have in on every platform and significantly bigger and all this, and they find it impossible to actually get work with companies, you know, because they just don't understand the kind of ins and outs that you have to actually. Yeah, it's like they'll write to a company and be like, okay, so we like let's work together, but then the company would be like, okay, send me your pitch deck, or can you send me your analytics from previous like collaborations that you've done, like, or general metrics, like, and it's one of those things where I think, you know, I took business when I was in school and stuff like this, but it is one of those things where I think that we've lost this narrative that was like classic advertising business kind of mentality. We've kind of like forgotten about that, even though that model is still entirely relevant, you know, and to understand that it's like going into any kind of negotiation, right?
That's right.
You have to have your ducks in a row. You have to be able to go to a company and say, you know, like, I would like to partner with you. These are the services that I provide. This is some example work of what I've done. Here's my pitch deck that actually has 12 pages breaking down my, you know, demographics, my, you know, like press, my, you know, it's like budget and rates, you know, and I don't know. I just think that like if more people, because I mean, it takes time. Like I spent an entire month, you know, every year, like around like December, I'll build the next deck out for the next year. And so it's like around December, I spent an entire month just making my own pitch deck, you know?
Yeah. Well,
and I do that every year. And it's one of those things where that's how you get work, you know?
That's right. Well, yeah, because you're putting in the work. You know, that's why I always talk about you on my show. Anytime something comes up, I always mention whether it's your name or your handle. But I'm like, yeah, this dude like fucking... You're right. For people only watching on YouTube, Bobby just made the Bobby face.
Take things pretty seriously here.
Yes, exactly. And by the way, speaking of seriously, if you haven't noticed, because I just got done working out, I am sweating like a whore in church. It is. I feel like I'm glistening. Am I glistening?
I'm always listening, but
shut the fuck up. Yeah, dude. It's so anyway, my creatine and my pre-workout is still like, can you hear my heartbeat? Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it's always like one of those things. Speaking of working out, being a creative is like working out. Like, you can be Liver King and you could take steroids, but at the same time, you have to work out, right? When you're on steroids, if you want results, you have to work out either way. And like, if you're a creative and you want to actually put in the work and you want to work with brand deals, you have to put in the work. If you have 100,000 followers and you're not putting the work with, like you said, the pitch deck, reaching out to brands, emailing people, pulling your analytics, taking the time and actually putting in 8 hours a day, you're not going to get shit. And so the following means nothing if you're not putting in the work. Same thing with working out. Like, you got to put in the work to do it.
It's kind of funny because like sometimes there are days where I truly, because I've been like, for anybody that's listening and doesn't actually know this, like I've been doing this as like a brand ambassador, content creator, or influencer, whatever the verbiage that you want to use, right? Yeah. I've been doing this for about a decade. It's like have been paying my bills exclusively by working with brands, creating content for them. And so, I mean, like, I've been doing this since kind of like around the beginning of when brands were starting to pay people to do this kind of stuff. And I don't know, it's one of those things. Yay! You finally got to use the Stream Deck.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's like sometimes like I genuinely just almost wish that it's like I was just doing a 9 to 5, or like a regular job sometimes, because I don't think that people realize, and like you just said it, but like I just truly don't think people realize how full time it is. To the point where it's like the way that I explain it is my favorite thing in the world is saying, my favorite part about being your own boss is that you get to choose which 15 hours of the day like you're working, and because it's like you're constantly working. You're either strategically planning for what you're going to be doing, or you're going to be shooting it, or you're going to be editing it, or you're going to be taking the time to actually put together pitch analytics and stuff like this to be able to use for upcoming meetings, or you're organizing your meetings, or you're reaching out to brands, or trying to find contacts on LinkedIn, or replying to brands. And there's never any blocked out time that you get to just like do this. It's like, especially Monday through Friday, it's like you could be in the middle of shooting something, and then suddenly like you get that email that comes in that requires you to step away and go dedicate an hour of whatever it is you're doing into something else. And it's like, sometimes it just gets so exhausting. And like, you kind of, at least like me, like sometimes I'm like, man, sure would be great if I was just working, like fixed hours and I got a weekly paycheck and stuff without the absolute, and it's like, if this is scaring you, it should, because it's like, this is the amount of commitment you have to put into this. It's like, if I'm putting together a project and I'm reaching out to a company in October, we'll be talking for maybe from anywhere from like a couple of days to a couple of weeks. And then I might actually get the product that I might shoot in, let's say, November. And then I finally get to actually post the product in December, right? I won't get paid for 30 to 60 days, sometimes even 90 days, depending on what the contract states, between net 30, 60, 90, net 45, after that project has been completed. So it's like, there are times where it's like, you'll have conversations to start something in October and you won't see a dime until March, and that is a very real normal day for people that do what we do, because it's like, you have to constantly be going.
And not to interrupt you, but I wanted to say this before I forget. In between that time frame that you're waiting on that job and you're actually doing that job, you're reaching out to brand and you're getting rejected constantly. Like you're getting rejected more than you're creating. And that's kind of the 15 hours a day that I've noticed. you know, these
Yeah.
just these last couple months that I've been doing it, where it's like you have to have thick skin on that aspect. But when you do finally get a job, you don't want to be overzealous and you don't want to lowball that because, oh, it's a job. I want to make sure I get it. I'm struggling for money. So you don't want to seem desperate. So you have to keep to your bearings and stick with your rate. And once you get that rate, then you have to do it. And then you have to be like kind of cool before you get paid. You don't want to be overzealous, like I need the money. You got to be indifferent about everything. So there's a lot of like hats you have to wear until you can build up, you know, good equity where you can feel, you know, comfortable with what you got going on. And you might not ever get there, but you know, that's kind of the balance, right? Is like, do you like what you do? You're going to put in the 15 hours, or you can clock in and out at a fast food joint, get a paycheck every single day, and you know, you won't have as much stress. You know, you just kind of have to weigh those odds.
The advice that I would give to anybody that's listening, if this in any way rings true for you, is so whenever I'm negotiating something for myself, so like I'll spend, let's say, like a week trying to get a contact on LinkedIn or something, and finally somebody writes back, you know, which by the way, it costs money to use LinkedIn, so it's like you're investing money in all these different like, you know, platforms and apps and things like this to give you the opportunity just to reach out to somebody. So let's say like you finally get like a person that writes back and they see your pitch deck and they're excited about it. They're like, yeah, sure, let's talk, you know, like this is what you want to deliver, and I'm explaining to them like this is how much it's going to be. One, I typically overshoot. You know, like I'll give them a rate that I feel like is appropriate, but it's higher than what I would expect. Then in this regard, you know, what I usually do next is this gives them the ability to counter, and it'll bring them down to a place where I'd actually normally see like, okay, this is actually a happy medium, happy middle ground of where I could live and be like okay with. So it might not be where I really want to be, but it's like better than if it was like I'm giving you what I think is fair, and then they come down, because they're almost always going to come down.
Yeah.
But what I always do, because I'm, you know, like I'm realizing very early on that it's like I have the power for this. I'm the one that's in control. I'm making the negotiation. I'm bringing them the opportunity and stuff. If they want to run with this, then it still is in my control, right? And so what I do is I set parameters. So I say, okay, well, you know what? Like, let's say it could be, you know, a series of videos and photographs, and I say it's going to be $5,000, right? Because I explained to them, well, I'm paying out, you know, Katie and her fiance Garrett for doing voice acting. That could be like $300 to $500, you know, and then the time that it takes me to shoot it and edit it and everything else. And let's say like they, you know, I say 5K and they drop it down. They're like, well, we don't have 5K. We can do this for maybe 3,000, right? If they're gonna, let's say, counteract like with that, that still is a very comfortable range where I could actually live with. I'm okay because $3,000 is essentially the mortgage, you know, for the month.
Yeah.
Whatever month that is when it comes in. But what I'll do is I'll sit there and say, okay, what I would like to do though is I want it to be in contract written that we have a net 30 pay period. So it's like kind of trying to find compromises. So it's like in this way, like it might give them the ability to kind of like, well, hey, we can't physically pay that. We just don't have the budget for it. Okay, that's okay. Meet me halfway then.
Yeah.
And then instead of trying to like pay this out at 60 days later, you know, it's like then all of a sudden I'm able to negotiate it down so that it's like they're paying it within 30 days, which is kind of like that's a huge win, because it's like 30 days after might sound like a ton, but that's the lowest end of the spectrum that you'll normally find.
Yeah. And, you know, again, that's the cool thing with about working for yourself is that might be one deal, and maybe you do laterally that you do another deal, right? So then, you know, 3, 6, maybe it's $9,000. You could pick up a few deals in a couple months. That's comfortable. Now, again, it's like you said, it's all about the hustling and things like that. But that's what's kind of interesting about this being on this side of the fence that I've noticed. Because, you know, now I'm doing this full time, so I don't have a job. I told you that, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's one thing I did notice is when you're back up against the wall, and you kind of have these like, not that you know, have to do it, and you have that level of pressure. It's kind of good because if you can look at it like you're clocking it out and you're good with time management, and you could figure out, okay, so this is my break even. This is what I have to make. So I have to make sure I can get this amount of money from XYZ deals. And usually when I get those, when I hit that money and I hit those deals, then I'm like, okay, Now I could chill. I found myself like I was trying to like do so much at a time, but then I forget. I'm like, I work for myself. If I can hit that number that I need to hit, a comfortable number, I just need to relax. Because the reason I wanted to do this full time, and you gave me this advice before, was like, if you do like it, that's great, but you also don't want to like get burnt out because then you're not going to like it anymore. And that's one thing I noticed is where not just the podcast, but with like Me Cute, which is going really well, and I got to juggle that ball. And then, also the UGC stuff. And now I'm actually, I've transitioned a little bit more because I've had so many people reach out to me about podcast coaching. So I got a couple clients that I'm doing podcast coaching now, which is just on a temporary basis. I usually do 3-month contracts with that. But I'm really enjoying that because then I can help people start their podcast and manage their podcast. And that's been a lot of fun and rewarding. And, but again, it's like you got to put in the hustle, you got to put in the time. But if you could just like figure out what you need and hit that number, that's what's kind of sexy about this side. Is like
I think the thing. Oh, sorry. No.
No.
I was there's that half-second delay, so it's like when I feel like it's actually like
come to Apollo Beach, motherfucker.
Like, I know, right? It's one of the things where I feel like, God, I swear to God, like I had the thought, and then it's like when we get interrupted, like I just brainstormed it out of there.
It's that delay.
What is it like? The beta such and suches that like flush your blood and
Oh yeah, I have everything. L-arginine, I have all that. So
you get all the beet powder,
yeah, beet powder, bro.
Okay, so what I was,
you got it? He remembered.
So I mean, basically, like let's look at it this way, though. Like, it's a little pivot actually, but let's take this time to actually do a rough like spitballing session, right? So
Please.
like, are there any questions? Because I feel like this is a real life scenario right now where, when I'm, because like I don't do this often, but there are a couple of my friends that like have become big on TikTok or bigger on Instagram that had just normal everyday lives. And then all of a sudden, like they're thrown into this world where they're just like incredibly popular. Brands are finally reaching out to them and they're coming to me for questions, and I'm able to kind of help consult them or, like help design like pitch decks for them or things like this to kind of like help lift them up, because they're friends. And because I think that it's just like, this is helpful.
For sure.
But if you were to be in this situation, like I'm sure this could be beneficial for your listeners. Like, what are some big questions that you think either you have right now or you think people should be asking if they were in this position where they're like, you know what, like there's something I love doing, and like what are the next steps? Because I feel like we're talking a lot about stuff that we've already engaged with over the last couple of years in private. People listening, they might be like, oh, well, that's great, but what about the stuff before? Or, like kind of the in-between stuff. So do you have any questions just off the top of your head of like, this is something I wanted to do, but I don't exactly know, like, how would you do it kind of thing?
Yeah. The big thing, which I think I know the answer, is just time management. That's one thing I don't want to say I'm struggling with because I'm digging my own grave when it comes to this, but that's one thing I noticed when I decided to do this full time. By the way, so we've talked about this before, but you've helped me drastically with. I had like this portfolio that was like a little whack. Let me see if I can sound a cool soundboard. It was like a little. No, wrong one. It was like a little. Nope, wrong one. Can't find it. But it was not. It was not the best. Crickets. That's pretty close.
That works.
It was, so you helped me kind of perfect that, and I think that's what has allowed me to get a lot of good brand deals. But the one thing I'm noticing now that I don't really know how to deal with is when, for me, my hands are in so many cookie jars.
I like to see you're spinning plates.
Yeah, exactly. Great analogy. And I can't do that anyway, so it would probably be just a tornado of plates flying all over the place. And of course, you had to use a plate analogy, retro
Yeah, right. I just think I just think it's appropriate because it's one
So
of those
true.
things where it's like
Yeah.
it's like the whole model and idea visually behind the spinning the plates thing is that it's not
Yeah.
just you've got to balance all these things. You have to keep them going at a certain speed, and so
True.
you end up like stepping away from one thing to make sure the other one's doing okay, and you're learning how to juggle in a thing where
That's
it's like visually that is just such a perfect analogy of like how fucking chaotic this is.
For sure, dude. And that's what I've noticed is, right now, because I got 3 plates, right? So I got the meet cute plate, and then I got the podcast coaching plate, and then I got the UGC/content creator plate. And I even kind of dipped in, like I just did a commercial a few weeks ago where I filmed that was pretty cool. I just got paid for a couple hours, which was great. And they found me through my other content. They're like, hey, have you ever done commercials? And I'm like, yeah, here's my rate. I've never done a commercial before. And so they're like, oh yeah, this is great. We'll book you. I was like, fuck yeah. So now I have that to the portfolio. But again, that's like, I'm doing so much, but I also don't want to say no to things. And I'm finding myself like in a perfect world, if you were asking me right now, you're like, Tony, okay, what do you want to do out of all those plates? I'm like, well, Meet Cute is kind of its own little beast right now, so I'm fine there. So, but I just want to do podcast coaching. That's all I want to do. I just want my entire life to revolve around podcasts. And that's helping people, that's designing channel art, helping with hosting, production, whether it's virtual or in person. Eventually, I want to open up my own podcast studio where I'll charge people per hour to use my space. And like that's like my long-term goal, but that's not going to pay the bills right now. Like I kind of have to do everything. And if that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't really know yet. I mean, I'm surviving, we're living, it's fine. So it's like, do I give myself a year? I think this is the question. It's like, I've really going hard with this for 6 months. I've been full-time creator. So do I give it another 6? Right? And then I'm like, okay, now I got to pick a lane. I got to drop one of these plates and I got to have one plate up. Or is it 5 years? Like I know there's no magic number, but that's kind of my question to you is like, when do I decide, fuck, I can't do this anymore. I can't spin these plates anymore.
I mean, honestly, like kind of like you said, like that's such a specific situation as well, because you've got the 3 verticals. You've got Meet Cute, you've got the podcasting, and then podcast coaching. Is that what you're saying? Or just kind of UGC content?
UGC content, yeah. I kind of looped the podcast
so
coaching into my own podcast, but yeah.
You do the podcast. Yeah. So like you've got these 3 verticals that you're working with. Now it's like the end goal, is to make ends meet. It's like you want to be able to put bread on the table, and if that means you have to kind of cut out your weekly Starbucks, or like whatever it might be, then you're like planning and trying to troubleshoot along the way. Like that's great. I think consistently I've heard this across the board. I could say the same thing for myself. There's a solid mixture of kind of like flipping a coin in the air and seeing how it lands, but at the same time, there is this thing where it's like consistently across the board, I say you have to do something full tilt for a year before you can really understand where that is going to be landing. After a year of doing something, you'll have a very good idea of whether you want to live in a city, whether you like the school you're going to, whether you're in a good relationship, but especially if you are trying to kind of like contain a work vertical, or whether it's a passion or something that is more career oriented, or you want it to become a passion that becomes a career. It's like you need to invest a full year or more into it. I think you've been doing this for a bit, but it's like doing this and juggling like this for 6 months is not easy, especially with just life getting in the way. But I do think that, like, especially after a year, you'll have a pretty good foundation of one, like, well, these are the mistakes that I made. And, these are the things that I can just like tick off right now. Like, well, I have a solution for this. And at a certain point, it's like your reputation's going to be there enough. And honestly, I think the trick is to make sure that you are going to be reaching out and using that year as efficiently as possible.
That's right.
So it's like, for example, let's say you and I talked about this, but it's like, let's say you reach out to 100 brands, 90 of them aren't going to like result in anything, right? You got 10 brands, like 10% of your like efforts are going to be rewarded. But I think the thing that people don't think about in that example is that it's like 10% of those might actually work out this year, right?
Mm.
But then for me at least, like I am relentlessly persistent. So like if I cold DM a brand, and they don't write back to me within, let's say like a month, I do it again. And I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. If there's somebody that gives me an email link and I send them like an email pitch and they don't get back, I will email them every single week until we get something in the books, because it takes that kind of ferocious like tenacity to kind of get through a situation and just be like, look, I'm not asking you to give me money right now. I'm asking you for 30 minutes of your day. Put this in a calendar. Give me an opportunity to actually chat visually with you, and then let me show you the value of what I do. And without fail, it's like if you keep being persistent in that regard, for me, 75% of the time that does result in not only a paid sponsorship opportunity, but it usually ends up turning into a longer term relationship, because not only are you actually getting in front of somebody, but you've broken that email barrier. You've had a physical contact with them. You've engaged. They've seen you smile, and they've seen your charm, and then later on they see the work that you put in and stuff, and they understand. Well, you know what? I need to have somebody to work on this next project in Q3. Why don't I think about Bobby?
Right.
Or why don't I think about Tony? And it's like the thing that I think people need to remember is that it's like if you're doing something right now and you're only getting the 10%, the next year you've got 90% of these other references that you've reached out to that you need to keep reaching out to, right?
Right.
But at some point, they are going to recognize who you are, and that number is going to kind of like dwindle down. So all of a sudden, let's say 15 months into doing this, right? It's like the people that you may have reached out to before, they might think of you when it comes to something that didn't work out last year because they just didn't have the budget or just wasn't the right call for them. But suddenly they might actually be like, you know what? We had that guy Tony who reached out to us in Q1 of 2022. We're now looking for a thing that might be a perfect fit for him. And instead of just them not knowing who you are, it's like now they actually have like kind of like that degree of separation where they can just remember you and refer back. But it
right.
does require like an insane amount of just diligence and just kind of following up, because I would much rather reach out to somebody 100 times, piss them off to the point where they're just like they're annoyed to see my email, but it's like I will be okay with you being annoyed with my email if it gives me the opportunity to work for that brand, and it's like there's a way
the worst. Yeah, the worst case is, what are they going to say? No, we're good.
Because it's never personal. It's never somebody
correct.
saying, no, fuck this guy, I don't like his face or anything like that. It's 100% of the time apathy. It's almost always, I don't feel like looking at this, and then an hour passes. I mean, you know how life is. Like an hour could pass and you'll entirely forget about what you were doing or what you were like meaning to do. So it's like when it comes to time management, it's like if I get a DM from a company that writes me back in Instagram and they say like a week later, and they'll message me back and they're like, oh, you should message such and such at this email. I'll do little things like I'll do a screen grab and send it to my photos, because I'm not going to remember it in that moment.
That's right.
But like 4 hours later, if I'm looking at something, or I'll be like, oh, what did I do when I sent in my photos? Then it's like I have that visual reminder that I can actually go and like send it to that email. I feel like that's like another helpful thing that I do. Yep. If I need to, I utilize my calendar as often as I can for little things, like even just I have a note in my calendar for tomorrow to follow up with an email with somebody, sending them another email tomorrow, because I wanted to do it on Monday and not on Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, smart. Yeah, I do the same thing. That was a good. Yeah,
it's just tiny little things to be persistent. Yeah,
and that's what you have to do in this role. And there is something interesting about this society, right? Because you see creators, now more than ever. I think I forget the number, but I was looking up the other day where there's more creators now, and they say within 20 years we're going to have more millionaire creators as we did with like the Bezos of the world, the Bill Gates, as you know, it took them, you don't remember, it took them 40 years to get where they're at today. But they're saying just creators as a whole, you look like Logan Paul, Mr. Beast, like these are great examples of people that have been only on YouTube for 10 years, 11 years. And they're already hitting millions of dollars and have their own brands and their own companies like, you know, Prime, the fucking, the isotonic water, sugar water. That's all it is. It's the Gatorade, a great marketing play of what Gatorade could be. But they're the number 8 beverage in that category. And coming from a guy, as you know, that used to be in the beverage industry, that is unheard of in less than 24 months. And now they got picked up by UFC, so now they're the official drinks. They got Body Armor out of it. They booted Bond. So you look at these guys, and these motherfuckers started a YouTube channel 10 years ago. But they were persistent and putting out videos as much as they could. And they did dip their hands in major, and they surrounded themselves with people that are as creative as they are. And you have to kind of have it all, and you have to put in that work for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and then maybe you can relax down the road. And I think in that world where I talk about that versus like we're also the laziest we've ever been, right? Like as a society, I feel like. So it's scary to think that you have to put in this much work to whether it be a creator or be a podcaster or be great at your secretary job, like whatever it is, you have to put in a little bit of effort. But I feel like if you do put in the effort and you have that stick-activity, I feel like you're going to outlast a lot of people because there are a lot of lazy people out there. And if you could just outlast everybody, I think you're going to be all right. You know?
Like, I also think that, like, for me, I think the thing that separates a lot of, like, I think there's a certain point, there's a plateau that you kind of hit as well, right? Where
Sure.
it's like, you will create, and you'll hit a certain point where there's only so much that you can physically do, right?
Mm.
And then there will be a certain point where it's like, if you are able to play the cards smart, right? You'll be able to actually make just enough money to find like a team that might be able to also like help you exponentially increase the amount of content and kind of like drive directions. You know, like I get the quick example is Joshua Weissman. You know, it's like if you watch any, I mean, at this point, I feel like you might actually know who he is, but it's like without even, you know, like being in a cooking culinary kind of aspect of things, like the name at least sounds familiar. And the guy went from being like a chef, you know, for his entire life. Like he was just an incredibly passionate cook, you know, that started off as like a young kid, you know, worked in restaurants like from ground up, like never went to culinary school or anything like this, wanted to do something a little bit more. You know, it's like he ended up wanting to kind of just make content that he felt would be better than like what was being shown in TV and stuff. Ended up shooting like basically really shitty videos, right? But they had value. And he did it to a point of time where, you know, it's like he had a good idea. He executed this idea for this video. He got to a certain point, got his chops. And then that video took off, went viral. He was making like $30,000 a month, you know, just of like the account, the virality that his like account was getting. And he took that money and he invested it in like a team that was basically able to like help manage, art direct, edit, shoot, all these things. And it went from basically like having this team to creating an empire. And so now it's like you think of like Babish, you think of Joshua Weissman, you know, it's like Peter McKinnon, you know, it's like these creatives that are just like huge. You know, they have teams that are behind them. And it's like that's where I've never managed to get. That's something that's where like I would like to get. And you know, obviously it's tougher, I think, for maybe both of us because we're both in Florida. You're in Tampa, I'm in South Florida.
Yeah.
It's not exactly like the most, it's not the same thing as like being in New York City and having you know, it's like we got Miami and stuff, but it's you know, like I would love to be able to find like trustworthy people that I could hire and like pay, you know, to like help me so that it's like you guys help shoot this, you guys edit this, we'll crank this out, the content goes up. Because it's like at a certain point, that's where the struggle bus kind of gets like a little rocky and stuff, because it's like making the content producing it, coming up with the ideas. Like, this is all stuff that you and I love doing. We love to do. You love to do your podcast. I love to make my cooking videos. The thing that gets tough about it is that it's like there's an ebb and flow of like what your energy demands are. You're in the mode right now. Like we're talking, and it's just like energy at 11. We're both feeling really good.
Yeah.
And then when it comes time later on for you to edit this, you're going to be energy level 4 and just be like going through the motions because you got to get through it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for me when I'm editing. I love the editing process. I love getting it done and being creative and seeing things differently. But it is one of those things where it's like if I had a team to help, then all of a sudden it's just like you were able to not only tap into that audience more regularly, but these other people might actually have ideas that are more up to date, more forward thinking. Like they might be able to see something and do like the shorter form content and bust out a ton of that stuff that like I wouldn't necessarily do or think of.
Yeah, and you know, I even play. That's such a great point because I played around with this company called Blank Slate, which is a really cool short form. They essentially just create, whether it's horizontal or vertical, short form content, but everything's done through a shared drive, and they pay for the month, or you pay for the month rather, and then you get 2 to 4 clips depending on what you're looking for. So what I wanted to do is back catalog all my podcasts. I think this will probably be episode like 199 or maybe 200. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, sick, right? So I was like, fuck, I have so much content out there, but I don't want to sift through everything because I also want to do the podcast. Plus I want to like create content, and I got the meet cute thing. So I'm like, I'm not going to go back and watch hours and hours. So I send them all these videos and I'm like, I want 10 clips of each of these. And it was a pretty hefty price. I mean, it broke down to like $30 a video. But what I found out was now I have a year of vertical clips that I could just put on YouTube Shorts and schedule the post. So I scheduled out like 4 months of shorts. So now I'm not posting anything on YouTube Shorts. I'm doing occasional TikToks and Instagram Reels, but now I can actually take a lot of that time that it would have taken me to do that stuff, and now I can invest into. I could reallocate that time into actually podcasting or creating content.
Yeah.
So I could I see what you're saying with like just having people around you that could do that, whether you're paying them or you're collaborating or doing something, you're trading services, like whatever you could do. If you could surround yourself with those people, it just makes your time. Because that is the one thing I notice about being a creator, is time to me is more important than the project. Because I could spend X amount of time on a project, and the more time I spend on it, it doesn't necessarily it's going to be better, especially nowadays, because I found myself being so picky, right? Whether it's a podcast or just the UGC stuff, and just creating the content, being like, doing my own revisions. And I'm like, I need to make this perfect. But then I realized, oh, fuck, I spent 5 hours on one project. I could have done 5 other projects and make more money. So you kind of get like in this mode of that's that time management where you got to realize that like a server at a restaurant, sometimes it's got to be about I got to turn the tables. I got to get the customers in. I got to get them out. And sometimes it's where you want to spend a little bit more time. Sometimes it's not. You know, you just got to kind of juggle those two balls.
I think like the other struggle that like a lot of people fall into is just I'd kind of touched on this at the beginning of things, but it's like that idea of like, you know, do you create content that is something that you can then utilize to pitch to brands like the way that I do, where it's like I created retro recipes fully with the idea that I was going to be able to like send this to a company with as a proof of concept and be like, this is why I think that you want to use your meter thermometer, you know, it's like with me because I can do this in this very creative, different way. And you do it like that. Or, you know, where it's like, that's how I generally make my income. I'm not making income based off of like views and stuff. Like I think I'd make like $300 maybe a month on like TikTok, if that, you know, it's like, that's not enough to even pay the groceries. It's like, that's such a minimal amount of income that it doesn't even feel like there. You know,
they could pull that. They could pull that at any moment too. That's the
any day. You know, or do you take the approach where it's like you are in the YouTube kind of side of things where you're like you're just trying to get duration of time, views, and things like this, and so sometimes it's just absurd sensationalism. And I think that like this is where the road is also getting like the picture's getting a little blurry because it's like at the end of the day, like you generally see people struggling with this, and they kind of create like this weird bastardized version of the two things where it's just like they make something that is absurd that you want to watch because it's just so dumb or it's so unbelievable or anything like this, and then they hold up their hand, they're like, money please, and it's just like, that's like, I think that we're at this weird place right now where it's just like, how do you, I don't know, it's so tricky because it's like, as I'm even saying it, it's like, it's kind of like this weird loop because it's like there is no answer. How do you create meaningful content that's engaging enough that people want to watch it for for what your niche is? Because for cooking, it's like, I feel like I'm in a better position than most, where it's like cooking, I feel like is a universal interest. I made the example recently that it's like you could be like a teenager in India that happens to pop on TikTok and see one of my videos, and even though you have no idea what might be going on or have no cultural reference or relationship to what I'm doing, you still might at least be able to enjoy this, like me making a silly thing, but at the same time appreciate it if I add like an ad in there that's interesting or fun to watch or something like this. But it's like
relatable. It's relatable for sure.
Yeah. But it's like, if you are, let's say a skateboarder that has hundreds and thousands of people that like follow your account because you're a really good skateboarder, I mean, maybe it's not even like the best example because I'm sure they do get sponsorships and stuff like that with like skateboarding companies or shoe companies, but it's like, what I'm kind of getting at is it's just like a certain where it's like you could have millions of views on that, but it's like that might not pay you a cent.
Yeah, and it's the community aspect as well. One thing I noticed with your channel is, at least I do, because I watch every single video and try to share as much as I can, is because not only do I enjoy it, but I feel like I'm a part of the community now, right? Like you're in an interesting, relatable topic, like you said, cooking, but it's also very niche as well because from what I know, there's not really anybody doing it. So when you're watching it. Yeah, when you're watching it, especially not like you do it because it's very unique and it's you. And you fucking laugh every time. I laugh every time you do it. It's the cutest thing ever. And I don't know if you're trying to do it, but that's like your thing.
No,
like
that's my thing. I nervous laugh, I happy laugh.
It's fantastic.
Like
it's great.
I feel like I just laugh at the absurdity of these videos because it's like that they're not going to be good, and then when I find out that it isn't bad, I'm like, this is insane.
And I wait for the reaction because the reaction to me is the best part, and I think that's what's captivating about your niche is, unlike a lot of other things like this podcast, there's so many great nuggets in here, and it's what we're going on an hour and fucking something minutes, not surprisingly, an hour and 15 minutes. But there's so many great nuggets in here, but there's no we don't know what the climax is going to be, right? We don't know the ending. And what's sexy about your videos, I feel like, and tell me if I'm wrong, is the ending of the video. You don't even know what it is, but your audience is sharing the same passion you do, even though it's not live, but they're waiting for the reaction as you are. You don't know if you're going to like this meal. You don't know if it's going to taste good or if it's going to taste bad or what it's going to look like. Is it going to be good? And that's what the audience is like on the edge of their seat, just fucking, what's his face going to fucking, is he going to cringe? Like what? Like that's what's captivating about that type of content. And I feel like if we're not consuming a video like yours, we're looking for that quick hit of heroin that we get a lot of, which is like we get the hook. We watch the hook of like some dude doing some stupid video, and it's that first 3 seconds. He's like, "All right, guys, I'm at the edge of the cliff. You won't believe what's going to happen." And you're like, I kind of want to see if this guy dies or not. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's that first interaction, that 3 seconds, and then we're waiting for the end. Versus like yours, it's just a minute or 2 minutes, but it's a little bit more entertaining. And I feel like there's only two spectrums. It's like there's entertaining, educational, motivational content that we want to watch the whole thing of. And there's the stupid 3 second hook that you get me in, and the video itself is only 7 seconds. Yeah. And that's what's getting the most views. Like I realized that in my content where I had like this guy on that's a psychiatrist that we were just talking, Danny Lagar, and he's given this unbelievable, like gnarly educational content to me. Like we're talking about married life and words, but it was a clip from it, and he talks about, hey Tony, you're a great guy, but if you're mad at me, I don't give a shit because I don't know you. But if my wife is mad at me, I want to do everything I can to make that better. And I kind of never thought of it like that because obviously the people we surround ourselves with, we want to do whatever we can for them. But when you start having a perception like that, like I'm thinking, dude, this is going to go like, this is going to have hundreds of thousands of views because that whole podcast was great, but that whole clip was fantastic. It got like, I don't know, a couple thousand. And then I posted a sauna video of me in the sauna. That thing has 500,000 views. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's a short video. And I'm like, this is where I get confused because I'm spending so much time on this, creating this content, what I think is good. But again, then I found myself what we talked about earlier, which is you can't think about what the audience wants. You just have to do what you like to do, and you have to put out the content, and you can't think about how people are going to react because it doesn't matter if it goes viral or not. You know, you can't always think about the micro. You got to think about the macro in the long term part of it.
I think the thing that's difficult also about what you do in particular with the podcasting is that it's like, and this is not just for you, this is for like anybody that has like podcast based content, you know, especially when they have like visual elements in there, you know, I've kind of come to find that it's like almost always, if they're taking the time to make like a short video that they're sharing on Instagram or TikTok or something like this, it's going to be incredibly valuable content, right? But it's one of those things where because it's just a person talking to you, you're not having kind of like visual differentiation, you're not having clips of other things and kind of making it more cinematic. Our brains naturally find it more difficult to just focus on that because again, that 3-second attention span thing. Yeah. So it's like when they see you in a sauna though, that sparks interest and curiosity, and it's kind of like almost vicarious elements of like, oh, I would love to be sitting in a sauna right now. Because I feel like maybe in a way like that's a little outside of what somebody can experience in that exact moment. Whereas when they're seeing you like in your office right now, like talking about something or sharing a clip of somebody speaking, it's actually just in their office and they're like, oh, well, I can go back to this anytime. Like it's about finding ways to captivate people. And again, it's so tough because it's like, I could be doing the same thing in my kitchen, like setting fires or things like this to get like that eye popping kind of like, you know, oh, I got to see this, or the way that people edit things where it's like the very last clip that leads into the beginning of things. So there's a perfect loop. Like I've tried all these things. And at the end of the day, it's like, I just think you got to stick with what you're doing and stuff, but just understand that it's like, because of what your niche is, you know, it's not necessarily going to have the easiest time piquing people's interest. So even though it's like a 10 out of 10 banger information that you're dropping some like heavy hitting shit, you know, that's going to absolutely affect somebody's life in a positive way. Visually, maybe it needs to have, I mean, like I've seen people do this where they literally just take stock image photos and they just paste it on there. It has nothing to do with anything. Right. Nothing to do with it. It could be somebody like flying a kite and they're talking about like setting fires. But it's one of those things where if you're providing, if you're providing stimuli, then that's actually going to like periodically shift someone's perception of what's happening, and they're going to retain it. There's an entire like science and subconscious like kind of art to getting people to listen to what you're saying on a platform, especially these days. Yeah. But it's like maybe try that out one day. Maybe just like take a banger clip of like what somebody's talking about that you want to share that's 20-30 seconds long, and then take the visual and then just or take the like their audio and then slap it behind a bunch of random images that pop up after they start talking and just see if that increases the views. Yeah. See, you know, because I mean, think of you know, great example. Okay, this is a perfect example actually.
I'm so excited.
Because I mean, like, just take a minute and think about it. It's the same idea as like the spinning the plate thing, right? It's like when it hits, it's just so good. Yeah. Okay, think about. I'm gonna put a little bow in this. Okay, so the reason. All right, so let me think of how I can say this in a nice, concise way. So, good copy, you know. But like, I think the reason why it's so difficult for people to actually pay attention to things is the same science that is behind why medication commercials, you know, are so like formulaic the way they're designed. Okay. It's like you've got people that are advertising a medication for mesothelioma or whatever it might be. And those advertisements are never, ever in any way related to what they're actually advertising. It's a guy going bowling when it's about erectile dysfunction medication. You know, it's a woman picking up her kid when she's got shingles, you know, and it's a medication for this. There is an art to what they are doing. They are basically taking imagery that has nothing to do with it, but they're putting it there because it will get you through it, right? And so if you were to kind of maybe test this out and apply that same kind of concept where it's like, let's say somebody's talking about this is a guaranteed way to lose 10 pounds, right? And then you just kind of like start adding stock image clips or video clips or whatever it might be, stuff you filmed yourself even, you know, of things that just might be visually interesting. It doesn't have to be related to it at all. It might actually get more engagement because it has nothing to do with it, but it's going to get people going through it and listening to it. And I don't know.
Just good B-roll. Yeah, I love that idea.
Because I mean, like that reference though, it's like for when you think of like any kind of thing that's coming from like Pfizer or Big Pharma or something like this, they know for a fact that you want nothing to do with this ad. You could not care less about what like Rebiltor or whatever these things are called are actually doing.
It makes no sense. Yeah.
No sense whatsoever, because you'll see 4 people that are sitting there, you know, like dancing in a hallway, and you're like, why are you I can't tell if this is a Thanksgiving advertisement for like Publix or if this is a commercial for like erectile dysfunction, you know?
That's so true. I love it. Hey, hold that thought. Hold that thought. But dude, that's so true what you're saying too, because not only does it not have really anything to do, those commercials, and I'm guilty of it as well, like watching those commercials, I'm super intrigued. Like if a guy has like ED and I'm like, wait a minute, so I'm like, wait, he's in the park. So hold on, is he gonna get an erection like right here? Is he not gonna get an erection?
Right in the park?
Like what?
He's with his dog?
But yeah, it's true, because they want to keep your mind off that, because then at the end of the video, they're going to shoot you with the side effects that are like 2 minutes long. So they want your mind.
No, they usually sprinkle it right in the middle of it, where it's just like, you know, like that's at the climax of when like he's shooting the basket from 3 points and he's 80 years old. It's just like, by the way, you might actually have heart attack and liver failure and jaundice and you know, like
lose your penis. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you're gonna lose a couple of toes.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Nah, dude, that's so true. And yeah, I have played around a little bit with that. I need to get back into that. It's just, again, it's a lot of work, obviously, to do that.
It's a lot of work, yeah.
But it might be worth it. And I think, you know, we go back to, we've kind of circled around this a couple times, but if you go back to enjoying it and enjoying the process, I think that is the key. Because I do truly enjoy that, because out of the whatever couple thousand views it gets, doesn't matter to me. When I have a few people reach out and say, yo, dude, I heard that podcast and man, I learned a lot. I was going a lot through with my wife, and it's just one person, 2 people. That's the type of shit that's like, ooh, that's cool. That's what you don't get at a 9 to 5. You know, you talked about how before where sometimes, yeah, right. Like sometimes you wish you might have a 9 to 5 paycheck. I don't get the praise that I did when I worked at Monster. I don't get the praise like I do now. And it's not like I'm fame motivated. It's just the praise as in like, you're putting out good stuff, dude. Like I worked almost a decade at Monster, got promoted 3 times, made 6 figures, and I didn't get a pat on the back. I didn't get a trophy. I didn't get, again, not that I was looking for that, but it just goes to show you that corporations, you're a number. It's just a fact. No matter what company you're in, look at what's happening with the tech world. Google laid off, I don't know what it was, 10,000 people. Amazon's laying people off. Obviously, Elon went in and cleaned out Twitter. Like 5 years ago, if you told people, oh, dude, I work at Google, I work at Amazon, like I'm job security, I'm good. And then you got laid off for no reason. You know, they're only laying people off just because we don't know what the economy's going to do. So it's like, what is secure? Well, all I know is I don't know what's secure and what's not, because I've been laid off from corporate jobs and I've quit corporate jobs, but I'm not going to fire myself.
Yeah.
Right?
I will say that like there is something to be said though about like and again, like this is not for everyone. This is 100% something I would like to preface, that it's like,
for sure.
You and I even had this conversation, and it's like I even said to you, this is not for everyone. I feel like you can do this because you and I have a very similar tendency where if our back is against the wall, it's like we perform better. You know,
Mhm.
I've known you long enough that it's like I understand that this is how you are. This is how we were
Yeah.
in high school, and it's one of those things where it's like if you are, I mean, like that's one of the biggest motivators for me is that it's like because I know I don't have necessarily something coming in for X period of time. You know, it's
Right.
like I
Yeah.
know that I need to like make that up in some capacity, whether it's creating a long-term contract with the company or just more relationships with fans, or just
Mhm.
in that case like just finding other like monetizing ways to be able to make something come out of it or just create more content. But it's
That's
like
right.
whatever it might be, it's like you have to find something like to do really well in this. You have to be absolutely focused. Like you have to have a lot of organization and drive. Like you cannot do this if you need to have somebody like micromanage you and tell you, okay, it's
Right.
3 o'clock, you should be doing this. Like you need to
Yeah.
be waking up every single day and just know that this is the kind of shit that you want to do and
Ready to
then
go.
make the most of that. Because
Yeah.
it's like if you can't, then you may as well stick with the 9 to 5 because like you have to have order in that sense. You have to have somebody threatening you, well, you're not here, you're fired.
You're right.
But it's like
Yeah.
for us, it's like, if you know how to get through a day and be productive and do tasks on your own,
Mm.
which sounds kind of simple enough, but it's like, doing it every single day. And I mean, every day, like
Yeah.
Saturdays, Sundays, I just filmed stuff before we were doing this. Like I'm
Yeah.
working for a company right now. It's Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like tomorrow it doesn't change. There are no real days off. You just get to
Yeah.
choose which 15 hours of the day you get to work.
Right. And I mean, Keiko and you are lucky because you're both creatives and you both have been doing this for a long time. But it's even more funny to me that now that I'm doing this full time, Brenda, even just now, I was before I started, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna do a podcast with Bobby. She says hi, by the way. And
Hey.
she's like, but it's Sunday. And I go, so? She's like, I mean, are like you edited because I edited some shit earlier today. She's like, but you spent most of the day. I was like, yeah, that's what it is. Because she's so used to Monday through Friday, 8 to 5.
Yeah.
Like she clocks out, and then at 5:01, if she gets an email, she says, "Fuck you," and as she should, right? Because the company's only paying you for that time. But it's hard, the mentality that there's two types of mentalities when it comes to that, and Brenda and I are very different when it comes to that. And it's hard for her to kind of comprehend it, but I've been doing it my whole life. Even when I was at my other jobs, she would always bust my chops, right? Because she's like, you're off work. What are you doing? Yeah. So it's like, it's not like I don't know. It's not like we started doing this and then we're like, we need to work 7 days. We need to work 15-hour day. I think we just have always been like this, and the creator world kind of found us. Like
That's actually a really solid way to put it. Because even when I was in New York, it's like I was, like I didn't have to work 3 jobs at a time, but I was working 3 jobs at a time because I wanted the opportunity to work at another place, to learn from these other people. And every job I was doing was different because it was giving me more like experience and opportunity to grow and do something different later on.
that's right.
It's like, I feel like you and I have always had I feel like actually most of the people that we went to high school with, especially that we still keep in touch with, like
Have
are
that.
we just all have that thing. It's like
Yeah.
we're all much related in the sense of like we will put in like way more effort than another person would have.
Yeah.
And we are the anti-millennial personality types where it's like I don't expect anybody to give me shit,
Yeah.
and it's like I will put in 50% more work on top of the 100% that I'm already doing over somebody else would have done. And so it's like, it kind of kills me when people are just like, fucking millennials are so lazy and entitled. And I'm just like, I mean, you can say this about anybody, but I'm just like, hold your fucking mouth right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Cause
Yeah.
you
better specify only a certain amount of millennials, okay? Because I'm falling into the other bracket. Yeah.
It's like I am not sleeping because I have things that I'm doing right now.
That is true, bro. Yeah, because we do kind of fall into that. Because every time someone asks me if I'm a millennial, I'm like, yeah. Because I'm always hesitant because they're always gonna say, "Oh, you fucking people are lazy," and I'm like, you don't know what I do on a daily basis, bro. Like
You don't know.
yeah, bro. Like I'm a baby boomer at heart. Like I'm fucking, I am not a millennial. But yeah, dude, it does take a lot of work ethic, and yeah, man, I'm excited for you. I admire everything that you've gone through, and I continue to uh, tell this to you just because I think you're so great at it. But yeah, it's the beginning for you, man, and I'm stoked for retro recipes, and it's such a cool concept, man, and it looks like things are going great. I mean, I assume I see a couple brand deals you're doing here and there, but like in terms of the meat and potatoes of it, do you have any like goals for it? Any upcoming projects that you're excited about? Like what's going on with it?
So
If
I
you can share, I don't,
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can share even like general things and stuff, but I think one of the big differences that I wanted to do going into this year. So last year, for anybody again that's listening, like I started Retro Recipes around Easter of 2021.
Mm.
The video production was a lot less frequent, and it wasn't until last year around this time that I decided to kind of go into TikTok, and then doing that, I started to get like the niche and the recognition that I never got on Instagram, and so the visibility increased. And I was like, okay, let's evolve this, let's make more. And so I started producing hundreds and hundreds of videos, and they like everything that I do has kind of like a different theme. I want Retro SB's Kitchen to almost feel like its own network station, right? So I've got basically at this point like 5 or 6 totally different series. I mean, like mystery meals. I've got my retro recipe videos that are like filmed and they look old and sound old. I've got the Bring It Back or Say in the Past series, which is kind of like faster and more informal, and a bunch of others that I've done. The award-winning recipe series. Like each of these have like a very different, special kind of like twist to it that I think my audience kind of like gravitates towards some more than others. And so it makes it fun because it's something for everyone. And one of the things that I've been doing is like, because I built out so much variety, I made it so that it was really easy for brands to kind of slip in places and stuff and find their little home of like how they would like to promote and advertise.
Yeah.
And last year I did a lot of kind of just like one-off campaigns, and for people that don't really know, a one-off is basically like, let's say, um, you know, like a frying pan company, right? Say
Right.
like Made In, right? Made In reaches out and stuff and just like, hey, we'd like to do a partnership with you. We'll send you product, and this is our scope of work. Here's your budget, and then they do one post, and then they're done. Like they might not talk to you again for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
What I've been trying to do is make more of a focus this year where I'm doing long-term collaborative efforts. So I'm actually reaching out to brands with a full pitch deck that is dedicated to just them. And, it's the whole idea of just like, this is what I would be offering for 12 months of service with these very specific things in mind. This is my normal rate. This is what the full year would be. This is what a 6-month contract would look like. And then kind of more importantly, explaining the reasoning. It's like there's an entire section based around actual statistics that show the difference between, I mean, it takes literally like somebody 5 to 7 times to see a brand before they actually recognize it as a thing. This is one of the
Right.
reasons why Coca-Cola and like, Pepsi and like all these other brands, they might release like the exact same. Think of the insurance commercials that you see, and they release the one commercial constantly,
Yeah.
on Hulu or on TV or whatever it might be. And you see this one advertisement 100 times in a year, right? But after about a week, the jingle,
Right.
exactly what they're going to say. And then the next time they come up with a commercial, it's going to be somewhat similar. And it's like that recognition is imprinted in your brain. And that's why like they spend maybe $1 million not to film it, but to kind of play it over and over and over, because the brand
push it out.
recognition is the most important part. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I try to impart this in my pitches to brands as well. I'm like, look, we could do a single one-off where it's going to be this much money, but I am trying to push for more of a long-term thing because I think the brand recognition is going to be more beneficial for you. Because at the end of the day, it's like, especially if it's like a smaller company, like it's not going to benefit them at all to work with you or me or anybody else if you're only going to show it one time to your audience. They're going to be paying out X amount of money for something that just statistically will not perform in their favor. It could be the best product in history, but it won't really matter because people aren't going to trust it. They're not going to recognize it unless they've heard it from a couple of other sources, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm doing this year is kind of making it more of a point to focus on long-term contracts. And so I've been putting together a lot of pitch decks, having a lot of calls and emails and video chats with companies to kind of like work on that. So the Q1 is basically setting up 2, 3, and 4 so that I can work on fewer projects and have the same, if not more, income,
Nice. Nice.
And so it's not like it's necessarily less work, but it's kind of one of those things where it's like I don't have to stress about not knowing what August might look like, whereas anything is extra is just kind of extra.
Yeah, well, and also too, I mean, it's mental health, right? Like you've been doing this for long enough to where you're smart enough to know, shit, man, if I don't fucking do X, Y, Z, there's going to be a lot of stress that trickles down to that. And I think that's another thing where it comes down to the planning and the due diligence that you are taking about figuring out a proactive way to make those long-term partnerships, because you know that, yeah, you're going to put in more work, but it's more work with less companies, which means if I could supplement that same income and do not less work, but less juggling, less plates in the air, as we're talking about.
It's almost like the same amount of work, it's almost like it'd be the exact same amount that I would normally be doing, but it is like in this case, it's just actually going to be benefiting the company more. And then I'd say like the other thing that I'm trying to do more is I've been really kind of like how you were talking about like podcast coaching, It's like I've actually been really enjoying helping out some of my friends that have like these larger platforms, but they never did this kind of stuff before. And so I've really been enjoying actually being able to like help and kind of coach people to understand the same way that we're talking about right now. It's like how they could be becoming more successful almost overnight. And it's like most of the people I'm, like helping out and stuff, it's like,
bro, I was going to call you after this and tell you, bro, when you were telling me, not only when we were just talking, but when you were talking about earlier, when you were helping a couple friends that weren't, I was like, you need to fucking charge and do this shit on the side. Like you need to be an influencer coach on the side, as if you don't have enough going on. But it's like,
it's kind of fun because it's kind of fun because it's one of those things where it's like ultimately the idea and the goal, because I do enjoy it. I genuinely like helping people. And it's going to require a little bit of like finagling. Like, for example, like one of my friends, he's got a very successful channel. And I wrote to him and I was like, look, do me a favor. I was like, because he's always coming with questions and stuff. And I'm helping him out with all this and trying to help him get his first contract negotiated. And I was like, why don't you do this? Make me a Bobby at your website email. We'll find a way to link that to mine. And so that way, when a brand is coming to you or like they're pitching something to you, you can say, send it to at, like Bobby at such and such or info at such and such, which links to me. Yeah. And then I can get that reply back appropriately and stuff, set up the communication stuff, because then there's an element of professionalism that goes into that as well. Whereas like
you got a partner.
And bring like a partner or like an agency, because, for example, like the difference between what I'm doing right now for my friend that like my agency used to do for me when I was with them. The only difference between what we're doing is literally the fact that they had X at the agency's handle.com. They had a website that was dedicated to that. Maybe some more connections, but at the end of the day, it's like when it comes to negotiating things, some of this stuff is the same information. And so it's like I try to explain to him like, hey, I'm happy to jump on calls and help out and help you negotiate and kind of like make sure that you don't get hosed when it comes to like these things. But, it's like, I think it's going to look a lot better if it's not like, my personal email at gmail.com being like thrown in the thread there. It's like a brand is going to be less interested or less appreciative. And so like, that's something that we're going to be working on. But eventually, who knows, maybe I might start up my own kind of, agency of sorts and then kind of find a way to make commission through that, because I feel I enjoy it. And at the end of the day, it's just making connections and just kind of establishing relationships with these brands and these people, and then being able to share that with others, because I already got him, immediately after like we did these couple of things, got him a job he
That's awesome.
got him a job that we negotiated up pretty well and stuff. And
That's
you know,
great.
it's like he was telling me, he was just like, yeah, I want to pay you for this. And I'm like, I don't want you to pay me for this because this is something I'm doing with a friend. I think it's I want to help him, you
Yeah.
know. But it's one of those things where I was like, this we didn't do anything special. It's like if I were to jump on a call and like help like negotiate things personally, or like if I was to work in a capacity where it's like I'm there as your voice to kind of make sure, then I was like, then I'll take a percentage of whatever we kind of get out at the end.
That's
But
right.
I know too many people that like, you know, work as agents and they make money doing this kind of stuff, and they just take 2% when they really
Didn't do shit.
shouldn't, you know.
Yeah.
They didn't do shit, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, my friend did all the work, and so
Well,
but
yeah, and it's,
that'd be a future.
yeah, dude. And again, it's just such a cool, because you could pivot it a lot of different ways, right? You could do it with creators, you could do it with actors. I mean, there's so many things that you can go, and you have experience in a lot of stuff. So I think it'd be very beneficial, and it's a huge value because a lot of people don't know where to start. You know, a lot of people got the talent, but don't know really where to start. So, and I've learned so much just going through this process, you know, as it is. And then that's kind of why I wanted to dip more into podcasting, is because a lot of people were asking. I was like, you know, I just like doing it. I like talking about it. So why not try to get paid for it? And I was like, what's the end game? The end game for me, like during the pandemic, I wanted to start this podcast studio. But you know, rent right now is just way too expensive. But I essentially kind of wanted to make this space where you can have 3 rooms, 4 rooms maybe. And I even started looking at space earlier this year. But again, it's just the market right now. It just doesn't make sense to get a commercial space or real estate as a whole. But I went to these spaces and I was like, you know, if I just get like these 4 rooms and then I can make each room to where it could be a la carte, you could bring your own signs, or I can have a TV where I can put up your logo. But I have all my cameras, audio equipment, sound pads, lighting, the Rodecaster, Zoom, like whatever audio we're using to record, everything stays there in studio. You wanted to do a Retro Recipes podcast. Let's say you and Keiko show up. You show up, you pay $150, $200 per hour. You record your podcast there. I have all the equipment for you. You don't bring anything. And then when you leave, I edit the podcast for you. And that's an additional fee as well. And then now you just hosted a podcast and you don't have to do shit. You don't have to have any equipment. You don't have to do anything. I'll make you the vertical And I was like, dude, I want to do that, because I looked around and there's a lot of places that you can rent space, but there's no actual studios where it has everything and also gives you the service. And I'm just like, how can I get there? Well, I got to build up a portfolio. I got to build up some clients. I got to see if this is worth it locally. And that's where I'm like, all right, let me do the podcast coaching first. Let me build up like, you know, dozens and dozens of people that use my service that really like it. And then what if I told those people, hey, if I had a studio, is this something that's interesting to you? Would you do it? And then if I could spend a couple years building up that portfolio of those folks, then maybe I can dip into that world. And I feel like that's what you can be doing. And that's part of what you are doing now, is like you're talking to these influencers and people that want to grow, but then you're like, build it up. And then if it's got some juice, you start your own agency, and boom, now you already have some clients on the back end.
I think like the one thing that I would add to that is kind of trying to think in a more globalized sense of things, where it's like the fortunate thing about like what I would be doing in the services that I provide is that I can do this remotely anywhere, right?
True.
And the only problem that I could see, and it's not a problem per se, but it's like the only criticism that I would say, or something to kind of consider and think about, is that at the end of the day, it's like,
Location.
you know, location. It's like, think of like the WeWork studios, like, you know, WeWork, you know, it's like those kind of things where it's like rental office spaces and stuff. The reason why that works is because the people bought every single place they could possibly get in the entire country, and they were able to fill it up because just like the availability and like the demand for it and stuff. But it started off in major kind of key hubs. The same reason why like you might see like, you know, expansion of like restaurants or things like this after a certain point.
Right.
And, you know, even though I don't know personally, right, how the market would look in Tampa or something else, you know, or even let's say like Miami, you know, but it's those things where I think that if you were to find a way to even like, let's say, rent a space or have a property in a location that is more
Geared toward
centered
that.
around
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like at least like where there might be like some kind of more of a metropolitan drive.
Hmm.
Like I mean, Tampa's not like a tiny city, but it's one of those things where it's like, is it a podcasting center? Is there
Yeah.
a convention center? You know, it's like, are there like, and that's where I kind of get into where it's just like, if you're going to be investing money and allocating funds into this, it's not a bad idea. It's a
No.
brilliant idea. I love the idea of creating a communal space that people can rent out, and it's not like a new idea either. It's like people have done this with music studios and things, but it does
Photography
have a
studios,
very
all that.
specific
Yeah.
thing, photography,
Yeah.
you know. But it is one of those things where it's like, you know, Keiko and I, we had a studio in Brooklyn, and I can say for sure right now, it's like it is not simple to run. It's not
Yeah.
easy to run, but
You got to be there.
we made
Yeah.
it work. You got to be there. You
Yeah.
got to have somebody you can hire, but it's one of those things where you have to have the location being
Mm. Yeah.
a first and foremost thing. And so it's like, I love the idea, but it's like, there's got to be a way though, where you can still provide a similar service,
Yep.
you know, without necessarily having
The
a
space.
because I'm just trying to think of like 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road. You know, it's just like in 5 years, the medium that we're seeing right now that you and I are doing is not going to be the same. We 5 years
right.
ago, we would not have been doing a video chat like this in the same way that we're doing it right now. In 5 years from now, it's going to be totally different. In 10 years, it's going to be totally different. And it's like, everything that I do, I try to think of like that ski approach where it's like skate where the puck is going.
Mm.
Right. And so that's why it's like, there's a lot of isolated time in my office. I might be like sitting, I'll be burned out from editing, and I'll take a step back and be like, how can I do this a little differently? What am I going to be doing 2 years from now that I'm not doing right now? Or what could I be doing? And so those are the little things that like I'd also suggest to anybody else, where it's just like, if you've got 30 minutes in your day before you have to cook a meal or before you have to be with your family or before you have to work or something like this, take 30 minutes to think about what you love doing, whether it's creating or whether it's your work, you know, and find ways to make that more efficient, make it more enjoyable. Find like every day, kind of like that 1% better mentality. It's
Right.
like every single day, try to find something about it that you can be doing better, or just find ways that you can slowly evolve and pivot, you know.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's going to be like where the advice kind of comes in. Because, you know, again, like living in New York, you know, it's like every agency, every place had their own, you know, like square footage kind of like office that they would have everybody come in. So if I had a meeting with my agents, you know, and like I'd come into the office from Brooklyn, go into the city and do this stuff and sit down for 10 minutes just for
Mm.
them to tell me something. Now, you know, we're entirely remote. I
Right.
could have a conversation with somebody from fucking Spain right now, you know, and
Yeah.
and it doesn't even phase. But it's one of
Yeah.
those things where like that wasn't a reality before the pandemic. So
So
try to think
crazy.
again, like
Yeah.
5 years down the line.
Yeah, and that's the only reason I didn't pull the trigger on commercial, because I even thought like, okay, so even down the road, what about? I even started going down this whirlwind of like, what if I rented an Airstream and leased it, and then gutted it out and made that like a studio, and then I would just drop that off at people's house, and they would pay to rent the Airstream, and that would be the podcast or photography studio or something like that. And I was like, I started going back, and then I'm like, all that sounds great, but at the end of the day, it's all virtual, like you said. I mean, it's people don't want physical anymore as much as they did. Like, I talk to Brenda about this all the time because she's fully remote now, and they're not even talking about going into the space. But they did a survey with all the iHeart employees where she works, and they're like, "How many of you would want to come to the office once a week just for a meeting?" Not one person said they would go back.
Yeah.
So it's
But
like,
again, like that's why I think it's yeah.
you,
But again,
you
I
gotta
think that's
be
why it's
there.
also so important. Like when
Yeah.
we're talking about kind of like pitching yourself to brands and stuff like this,
Right.
we are now getting to this place where we're boxing ourselves in tighter and tighter to like our own little circles.
Mm.
And so, you know, that's why I think it's so important that like I make it a point when I'm reaching out to somebody, even if it's an email and they come back, they're like, that sounds great. I still make it a point to say, let's jump on a call, because
Right.
I want them to physically see me. I want them to see my personality, to hear my voice, to understand that I'm a person, because we need to be able to, we have to at this point actually kind of fight to kind of keep some
Yeah.
of this like humanity in what it is we're doing and stuff,
Yeah.
because
We're
like
getting
you said, like nobody wants to go into an
Right.
office. Nobody wants to be around other people, but we still long for that connection. Even if we don't want to, we feel better when we've had it.
For sure, no question. I mean, that's and that's why with you, I like to call. I mean, there's a good close group of friends that I call or FaceTime just randomly, or just make it a monthly thing. Which, by the way, we need to do it more. But it's like one of those things where I just can't handle this society disconnecting more. Like every day, it's whether it's the brands I work
Happened
with or my
overnight.
friend, literally, right? Like it just seemed like people just out of nowhere, they're like, "Oh, there was a pandemic, so for the rest of my lives, I'm going to stay disconnected and stay on my phone and not talk to people." And then when I end up talking, either to you or like my close friend, and I'm just like, "This is way better. This is way better than being like at the house on the couch on my phone scrolling like a fucking maniac when I could just have this."
And obviously,
yeah,
it'd be better if it was like you and me in person. But it is something to be said about the fact that it's like there is a way to kind of like kind of get like what you need out of just a virtual like camera setup like this. Jump on a podcast, whether it's good or bad audio and stuff. Like
totally.
that's enough for I think for most people.
Yeah. Well, and what's even more fascinating about this medium is people don't understand. We're going on almost 2 hours here talking. So I don't know about you, but we've been pretty much engaged like we usually are when we talk. But we haven't touched our phones. Like we haven't looked on social media in 2 hours, right? And think about a time, if you're out there listening, think about a time where a day goes on that you're awake.
You have 2 hours away from your phone.
Bro, that would never fucking happen. Even when
unless you're working.
Unless you're working, of course. But even when you're working, if you're in our business, you're always fucking, right? You're posting and you're doing shit and you're looking. But like Brenda and I were out at First Watch this morning for brunch. Shout out First Watch. And we went there and we found ourselves like almost when there's a little bit of dead air, we grabbed our phone and we're like, oh, like we had to stop. And that was a 30-minute brunch, right? Because we need that constant dopamine hit. And when you're doing things like this, and when you're FaceTiming or when you're talking, that's why I love FaceTiming with people. That's why I love randomly FaceTiming you, is because you can't go on social media and also FaceTime. Right? Like you can't scroll, listen to videos, and also FaceTime somebody because they'll know because your screen will go black. But I've like had phone calls with people. I don't know if you have, but I've had phone calls with people, and I'll be like, especially my mother, sorry, Mom, but she'll call me randomly on the phone, and I'm just like, yeah, for sure. Tell me about your day. And I like find myself going on fucking Instagram for a second. And she'll ask me a question. I'm like, what was that? Sorry. And then I'm like, okay. I'm close to it. So even still, I'm on the physical phone, and I find myself. But when I'm FaceTiming with somebody, obviously you're just in it. And there's something unique and special, and we need that as a society. I think we need to continue that eye-to-eye contact,
Here's my thought. Here's my theory, okay? In 10 years, if the world is still existing, okay?
Is this a prediction? Hold on. Is this a prediction? Yeah. Clip it.
This is a prediction. Okay. In 10 years, we are either going to be like so far, like we're going to be so desperate to connect with people that we are no longer going to want to be on our phones, or we are going to be so far gone that like I can't even visual. I mean, like, again, think about like 50 years before, the idea of telling somebody we keep our phones in our pocket all the time, they would laugh at us. Yeah. But it's like, I just truly can't imagine. I think that at a certain point, either the new generation is going to actually sit there and realize, oh, how, like, because like how old things are now coming back. So it's like people right now wearing like Y2K fashion, or like 80s, 90s fashion. They're like, this is so fresh and cool. Like I think in the same kind of way, it's going to be one of those things where people are going to be like, oh, God, what's so cool is actually talking to a person in person, or like writing snail mail. It's going to be in vogue to actually like do this analog shit that we call talking to a person instead of just like scrolling through phones. And I think that is going to be like the trend in 10 years, where it's like right now we're spending so much time talking and thinking and brainstorming about ways to like fit into the model and the mold of what we have right now. And then by the time we actually figure it out, people are going to be like, I'm with this. I only want to talk to people in person. Get away from me. You don't want to do a Zoom chat? I don't do Zoom chats. I'm organic conversation.
We go to cafes and we talk and sit with people. Do you bring your laptops? Psh, That was so 2020. Like,
Yeah.
we
You
want
have to
face
keep your
face.
phone in a Faraday bag. You know, it's like
Dude, you're so right too. Because I thought we were gonna be like that after
10
the
years.
pandemic. You know, like I thought within that 2 years that we were all isolated, and I thought like the next day I was gonna get like an influx of like, you know, this love and this, let's go out to dinner, let's do this, and there was a little bit of that, sure, but I feel like it's kind of tapered off, and now it's really not there. And the help with like Chat GPT isn't helping, where it's making everything so like automated, and there's a whole wormhole we can go down there too. But it is like there's so much cool shit on these devices and on this laptop, and I found myself consuming so much of it. Especially when I was going through hiatus of like trying to figure out what to do in the career, where, you know, you spend 6 to 8 hours on your phone. And if you're sleeping 8 hours a day, if you're lucky, that's half the day that you're spending just not interacting with people. And it's kind of scary, you know? And then, you know, you think about like what's actually going on in the world, like real world shit, which I'm sure you have opinions on, which maybe we'll have to do a whole nother podcast on that. But like people don't understand that like World War III is really close. Like we need to be super aware it's closer than it was like 2 years ago.
Yeah. It's the first time since like the 80s where it's like I'd say like kind of like 70s, 80s, like Cold War, you know, like pre-Cold War and the Cold War era and stuff. This is the first time in like almost 40 years where we're kind of just able to sit there and be like, oh, I could see a lot of bad things happening. And it's like we are seeing a lot of bad things happening. But I mean in like
where it's possible.
I mean in that like it's like it. Yeah. So anyway, that's again a very different conversation.
Yeah, but that's what's fascinating about where we live, right? Because the reason I bring that up is like we're so like into this, you know, that we forget about everything else. Like we forget about the real world shit that's going on. And maybe we do that subconsciously, that we don't want to hear about it. And I'm sure there's a little bit of that too. But I think it's important to realize that, because what's cool, that's why I love like studying, you know, planets and astrology and like just out of the world thinking, is because it makes you feel small. And I think we need that a little bit more. I think when we look at our device, we feel big, right? Because we're in control. We can scroll. I could like, I could dislike, I can comment, tell you to go fuck yourself. I can comment, tell you this is a great video. So we're in control when we're on our devices. So when we get out of the devices and we start thinking about the real world, everything's out of our control. Even your health, everything's out of control. You don't control shit. And that's scary to people, I think, you know?
I think like you kind of nailed it though, where it's like in a weird way, it's like the blessing and the curse, where it's like if you are actually able to take time to understand that we are like, it's like I keep seeing these things pop up where it's just like our cells are made up of hundreds and billions of other small cells that form those cells, which then form life, which then is on planet Earth, and that there are like you could fit 100,000 Earths in the sun, but then there's like a bigger like version of the sun where you could fit 100 million suns inside of that sun, which then fits into a bigger universe, and it expands. Oh, and it's also an ever infinitely expanding universe. Yeah. And like it's a really quick and easy way to just sit there and just realize that you just like nothing fucking matters. And everything that we talked about in this conversation was so, and we wasted 2 hours of your day if you're listening to this.
Yes, because there was way more crazier than shit going on in this. Yeah.
Make sure that you go out, you order that fucking pizza, you get those cinnamon rolls, you eat it and enjoy it, because this might be the last fucking day that you could do it.
And with that motivational speech, everyone, good luck out there.
We're all fucked.
Hey, we're funkin'. By the way, that is a default like music bed, and I'm really into it. Actually, that was the first time I've used it, and I think it's going to be my outro for the rest of my life.
It's so good. Which, as we just said, could possibly be like 8 seconds from now. So
that's right. Yeah. But dude, listen, man, it's always good to hear from you, man. I'm so glad things are going well with Retro, and let people know where they could find you, what you got going on, all your socials, all that, so that way they can check you out.
So yeah, as Tony mentioned at the beginning of this, you can actually find all the information in the show notes below. But you can also find me on Instagram at fellow, or you can find me on TikTok at Retro Recipes Kitchen. Recipes with an S.
I love it, dude. You're doing such a great job, man. I'm so proud of you, so happy for you, and I miss touching your face. So we're gonna have to do this in person. Ooh, don't squeeze too hard, my cheekies. All right, Bobby. Well, dude, you got. Yeah, I know, dude. Don't remind me. I'm gonna have to edit that out somehow. Just cut off for it. And you only got like what, 24 hours left of freedom? I mean, what do you got going on? Right? You got the place to yourself for like the next day. Yeah.
I got it for about like 12 hours. Yeah, like Keiko gets back. I have to drive down to Miami. I'm going to pick her up with her girlfriend. So she went to Argentina with around like 7 in the morning, 6, 7 in the morning. And but honestly, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I'm useless when I'm by myself. Like I try to stay as productive as possible, but like my routine in my life is entirely disrupted when Keiko's out of town. So it's like I look forward to her getting
When she's
back.
back,
'Cause,
yeah.
yeah.
No, you guys are definitely yin and yang. Like, you know, just you by yourself. Like I couldn't imagine. It's, you know, you need her. And she needs you, just like Brenda needs me, and I need her. It's, you know, perfect match for sure. But all right, dude. Well, hey, enjoy the next 12 hours of freedom, buddy. And I will talk to you after this, I'm sure.
Talk to you later, brother.
Later, buddy. Oh, hey there. First of all, thanks for making it to the end of this video. Not a lot of people do, according to the YouTube analytics. But I do want to say thanks for listening to this. There's some more episodes if you want to check those out, and they're all just as good. But if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Check out those timestamps below to reference some of the topics I talked about, as well as some discount links to some of our sponsors and affiliates. But thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time.